I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who stayed after being cheated on. If you'd asked me at 25, I'd have laughed and said something self-righteous like, "Once trust is gone, so am I, but it turns out, life isn't that clean." Love, real, messy, grown-up love, doesn't come with a script. Sometimes it drags you through the kind of pain you swore you'd never tolerate, and you stay anyway, not because you're weak, but because walking away feels like cutting off a limb. When it happened, I was 32, living in a downtown apartment with a view of the skyline that felt more romantic than it was. I'd been with Eric for 6 years, married for 2. We met at work, cliché, I know. He was in marketing, I was in design, and we bonded over our mutual hatred of corporate happy hours and fluorescent lighting. He made me laugh easily, the kind of laugh that makes your chest ache afterward. The first few years were golden. We were that couple people pointed to as proof that modern love still worked. Shared Spotify playlists, late-night takeout, an apartment full of plants we were both too sentimental to let die. But somewhere along the line, routine blurred into distance. I started staying later at work, he started traveling more, and our connection thinned like an overplayed song. I found out about the affair on a Sunday morning. He was in the shower when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wasn't snooping, at least not intentionally. I just saw her name pop up, Rachel read. My stomach dropped. That stupid heart emoji, so casual, so obvious. I remember staring at it, my thumb hovering, every cell in my body screaming don't look, but curiosity and dread are siblings. One always drags the other along. The messages weren't even explicit. Just a stream of inside jokes, misuse, plans that didn't involve me. The intimacy of it was what broke me. The everyday tenderness he once reserved for me, now given to someone else. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I went numb. We spent the day as usual, grocery shopping, folding laundry, making dinner. I watched him move around the kitchen like I was watching a ghost, and in a way, I was. The man I loved had already left, his body just hadn't caught up. That night, when he fell asleep beside me, I cried so quietly that the sound barely escaped my throat. It wasn't cinematic. It was the kind of crying that makes you small, shaking silently in the dark, praying for a rewind button that doesn't exist. The next morning, I told him. I didn't scream, didn't throw things, I just said, "I saw your messages." He froze, his face shifted from confusion to fear to shame so fast it made me dizzy. Then came the apologies, endless, desperate, rehearsed. It didn't mean anything. It was just texting. I swear it's over. But that's the thing about betrayal. It's never just anything. It's a fracture that splits open every memory, every kiss, every promise. For weeks, we lived like strangers. We went through the motions, pretending to try, therapy, date nights, long talks that circled the same questions. I wanted to believe we could fix it, that love was stronger than his mistake. But the truth is, once you've seen the worst of someone, you can't unsee it. You can forgive, but you never forget. One night, maybe a month after the confession, I was walking home from work when I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Liam. We'd gone to college together, dated briefly, and parted on good terms. He'd moved to the city a few years after me. Seeing him again was like stepping into warm light after months of gray. We caught up over coffee that turned into dinner that turned into another dinner. He was kind, funny, and safe in a way that felt dangerous. Because I knew, deep down, that safety wasn't what I was looking for, it was validation. I wanted to be wanted again. It started with messages, harmless, I told myself, then a kiss in the backseat of his car, then a hotel room on a rainy Thursday when I told Eric I was working late. I wish I could say I felt guilty right away, but I didn't. For the first time in months, I felt alive, desired, seen. But the high was temporary, and when it faded, it left behind a hollow ache. I had become the very thing that destroyed me. When I told Liam I couldn't keep doing it, he just nodded. He said, "I knew you weren't mine to keep." And somehow that hurt more than anything Eric had done. I confessed to Eric a week later, not out of honesty, but out of exhaustion. I couldn't carry both our sins anymore. He didn't yell. He just sat there, staring at me with a kind of quiet disbelief that felt worse than anger. "So this is it then," he said. I wanted to tell him no, that we could still find a way through the wreckage, but we both knew the truth. You can't build a home on ashes. He moved out a few days later. The apartment felt cavernous without him, echoing with absence. I thought the silence would crush me, but it didn't. It stretched slowly into something else. Space. I learned to sit in it, to let the quiet be a kind of peace instead of punishment. Months passed. I started going to therapy alone, running in the mornings, cooking for one without bitterness. Healing isn't dramatic. It's small, repetitive acts of choosing yourself. Sometimes I still see Eric's name pop up on social media. He's dating someone new now. She looks kind. I don't hate him anymore. I don't even envy her. I just hope he's learned what I did. That love without honesty is just performance, and forgiveness without change is self-betrayal. And as for me, I'm still learning how to trust again, not in someone else but in myself. Because that's where the real rebuilding starts. The first few months after Eric left were a blur. I thought heartbreak would feel loud, dramatic, cinematic even, but it was quiet. Deafeningly quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your chest when you realize no one's going to text you good morning or ask if you need anything from the store. It wasn't loneliness in the obvious sense. It was absence, pure and heavy, threaded into every corner of the apartment. His toothbrush still sat by the sink for weeks because I couldn't bring myself to throw it out. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about admitting that something so permanent could become disposable. At first, I tried to fill the silence with noise. Podcasts while I cooked, music while I showered, Netflix while I fell asleep. But it was like trying to drown out an echo. No matter how loud it got, my mind always found its way back to him. Or maybe to me, the version of myself I had lost in all of it. I couldn't decide what hurt more, that he betrayed me, or that I'd betrayed myself trying to hold us together after he did. Therapy helped. Slowly. My therapist, Elise, had that calm, grounded energy that made you feel both safe and uncomfortable. Safe enough to unravel, uncomfortable enough to face what you'd been avoiding. She never told me what to do, only asked questions I didn't want to answer. What did loving him cost you? What did you give up to stay? If he hadn't cheated, would you still be together, or just still pretending? Those questions lived in me long after the sessions ended. They chipped away at the story I'd been telling myself, that I'd been a victim of his choices, that my affair was some kind of poetic revenge. The truth was uglier. I had betrayed myself long before either of us betrayed each other. I'd stayed silent when I should have spoken, settled when I should have walked away, begged for crumbs when I deserved the whole meal. Healing wasn't linear. Some days I woke up feeling strong and independent. Other days I found myself scrolling through old pictures, wondering how two people who'd once been everything to each other could become strangers. I missed the routine more than the person, the shared grocery lists, the Sunday morning coffees, the way we'd sync our calendars like we were syncing our lives. It's wild how love can become habit, and habit can masquerade as love. One night, about 6 months after the divorce papers were signed, I went to a friend's birthday party. It was one of those rooftop things, string lights, too many people pretending to know each other, overpriced wine in plastic cups. I almost didn't go, but something in me wanted to prove I could, that I was okay, that I wasn't the woman defined by what had been done to her. That's when I met Noah. He wasn't flashy or overly confident like the guys I usually gravitated toward. He was quiet, observant, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. We ended up sitting side by side on a worn-out patio couch, both of us watching the chaos unfold around us. "Do you ever feel like everyone here's performing?" he asked, smirking. "All the time," I said, relieved someone else saw it too. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing, jobs, childhood memories, the weird way time stretches and folds after heartbreak. He'd been through his own version of hell, a long-term girlfriend who'd left him for someone else. There was no bitterness in his voice, just quiet acceptance. I envied that. We exchanged numbers, and for weeks we talked. Not in the obsessive, all-consuming way I used to with Eric, but in a slow, steady rhythm that felt safe. I didn't know what to do with safety anymore. It was foreign, almost suspicious. Every time he complimented me, I waited for the other shoe to drop. When he didn't text for a few hours, my brain invented stories. Elise told me that's what trauma does. It teaches you to anticipate the wound even when there isn't one. Noah was patient. He didn't push. When I told him about my marriage, about what I'd done, about the woman I became in the wreckage, he just said, "We all break in different ways. The important thing is what you build afterward." It scared me how much I wanted to believe him. Our relationship unfolded quietly, like a sunrise you don't notice until it's already there. He show up with takeout after my therapy sessions, knowing I wouldn't want to talk. He'd text me random songs during work days, and somehow they always fit my mood. He made me laugh again, not the forced, I'm fine kind of laugh, but the real one, the kind that catches you off guard. Still, I was cautious. I'd spent years mistaking intensity for love, passion for connection. This time, I wanted to choose differently. But healing has a way of testing you. One evening, about a year into dating Noah, I got a message from Eric. Just a simple, "Hey, been thinking about you. Hope you're okay." My stomach twisted. It had been so long since I'd seen his name on my phone. For a moment, I was 29 again, naive and trusting before the world cracked open. I didn't reply, at least not right away. But the message lingered in my head, circling like smoke. Part of me wanted to tell him off, part of me wanted closure, and part of me, an embarrassing, secret part, wanted to hear that he still thought about me too. When I told Noah, he didn't get angry. He just looked at me for a long moment and said, "You don't owe him a response. But if you do reply, make sure it's not the version of you who still needs his validation." That line stayed with me, because that version of me still existed, small but stubborn. The one who needed to be chosen, even by the person who had once broken her. I ended up replying a few days later. Just one sentence, "I'm doing okay. I hope you are too," nothing more. It felt like exhaling something I'd been holding for too long. He never responded, and I think that was for the best. Some doors don't need to be closed, they just need to stay unopened. Life moved forward as it always does. Noah and I built something quiet and real. It wasn't perfect. We both carried ghosts. But we learned how to meet each other there, in the in-between, where love isn't about fixing what's broken but holding it gently anyway. Years later, when I think back to that woman who sat on the edge of her bed, holding her husband's phone, heart shattering in her hands, I don't see someone weak. I see someone learning, someone unlearning, someone who had to lose everything she thought love was to understand what it could be. And maybe that's the point of all of it, not to be unscarred, but to be real. To love again, not because you forgot the pain, but because you learned to live alongside it. About 2 years after meeting Noah, life had settled into something that resembled peace. Not the cinematic kind, where everything is perfect and every loose end is tied up with a bow, but the quiet, earned kind. The kind where you wake up next to someone and realize that calm can be its own form of happiness. We had moved into a small apartment together. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, soft light, and plants I kept forgetting to water. There were routines, but not cages. We didn't merge lives in the suffocating way I once thought love required. There was space between us, and strangely, that's what made me feel safest. I had a new job by then, communications director for a small nonprofit. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. Every morning, I walked the same 6 blocks to work with coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, scrolling through emails, playlists, sometimes old Reddit threads about relationships. It was funny, reading other people's heartbreak after surviving my own. I saw so much of myself in strangers, the way we rationalize red flags, the way we confuse history for destiny. There was a post one morning that stopped me cold. A woman wrote, "How do you forgive yourself for the version of you that stayed?" The comment section was full of cliches. Time heals, you grow, you move on. But one response hit me hard. "You forgive her by realizing she didn't know better yet, and then you love her anyway." I don't know why that line stuck. Maybe because I'd spent years punishing myself for not walking away sooner, for cheating back, for staying, for everything. But that morning, for the first time, I didn't feel like I was reading about someone else's pain. I felt like I was finally forgiving mine. Noah and I were good, mostly, but even the best relationships aren't free of ghosts. Sometimes, out of nowhere, I'd feel this panic, like if I let myself love him too much, I'd lose myself again. It would happen in small ways. He'd ask a simple question like, "What do you want for dinner?" And my brain would short-circuit trying to give the right answer, as if there was one. He noticed. Of course he did. One evening, we were cooking together. While he was cooking, I was pretending to help, and I must have zoned out mid-conversation. He set down the knife, looked at me, and said softly, "Where did you just go?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "You do this thing," he said gently. "You disappear. You're here, but not really. And I don't want to pull you back if you don't want to come back. I just want to understand where you go." I didn't know how to answer, because where I went wasn't a place, it was a memory, a loop. The moment when I stopped being seen. The years I spent making myself smaller so I wouldn't be left again. "I go where it used to hurt," I finally said. "It's like muscle memory." He nodded. "Then maybe we can make new memories, different ones that don't hurt." That night, he held me like someone who understood that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means being patient with the parts that still flinch. A few months later, my ex-husband's name came up again, but not because of me. I ran into a mutual friend at a conference. We were catching up, making small talk when she said, "I saw Eric last month. He's remarried now, has a kid." It didn't hit me the way I thought it would. There was no anger, no longing, just this quiet acknowledgement. Like hearing about a distant relative you used to know. Still, on the train ride home, I caught myself thinking about him. Not who he was to me, but who he used to make me believe I was. The desperate, restless version of myself who thought being chosen meant being loved. When I got home, Noah was on the couch, reading. I sat down next to him, and without saying a word, he reached for my hand. I didn't need to explain. He didn't need to ask. That's the thing about love when it's real. It doesn't demand explanations. It listens to the silence and still understands. The years went by quietly after that. We didn't have some grand, sweeping romance. We had something smaller, steadier. Dinners on the couch. Weekend trips. Fights that ended with apologies instead of silence. And in that quiet life, I found something I hadn't had in years. Peace that didn't depend on someone else's approval. I thought that was the end of my story. But life, in its unpredictable way, always finds one more thread to pull. It was a Saturday morning when I found out my mother was sick. Stage 3 cancer. The kind of phone call that makes the air leave your lungs. I flew home that night. Noah insisted on coming with me, but I told him no. I needed to face it alone. Seeing my mother like that, frail, smaller somehow, was a reminder of how fragile everything is. She'd always been this strong, untouchable woman, the kind who never showed weakness. And now, lying in that hospital bed, she looked up at me and said, "You look happy." "I am," I told her. "Good," she whispered. "You used to look trapped." I didn't realize, until then, that she'd noticed all those years ago. That my unhappiness had been visible to everyone except me. When she passed 6 months later, Noah was the one who carried me through it. Not by fixing it, he knew better than that, but by simply being there. Sitting next to me on the floor of my childhood bedroom while I cried. Cooking when I forgot to eat. Laughing softly at memories I thought I'd never be able to say out loud again. Grief changes you, but so does love. One evening, after the funeral, we went for a walk. The sky was that kind of bruised purple that happens before rain. I remember stopping in the middle of the street, turning to him, and saying, "I don't want to lose myself again. Not to love, not to pain, not to anyone." He smiled, that soft, knowing smile I'd fallen in love with. "Then don't," he said. "You can love me and still belong to yourself." And maybe that was it. The lesson, the closure, the point of everything. It wasn't about betrayal or revenge or heartbreak anymore. It was about finding the version of myself that existed before all of it. The one who wasn't defined by who she loved, but by how deeply she could feel, how bravely she could start over, how honestly she could live. Sometimes I still think about the girl who wrote her story online years ago. Hopping strangers would tell her what to do. If I could go back and talk to her, I'd say this. You will survive this. You will lose things you thought you couldn't live without, and you will find yourself in the wreckage. You will fall in love again, not because you forgot what broke you, but because you finally learned that love isn't supposed to break you at all. And when you do, when you wake up one morning next to someone who sees you, truly sees you, you'll realize that every wrong turn, every heartbreak, every choice that once made you hate yourself led you right here. Not perfect, not whole, but real. And that somehow is enough. Months after my mother's funeral, the apartment started to feel like it was breathing again. For a long time, it had been heavy with silence, that strange, thick kind that fills a room when grief settles in. The plants wilted, the dishes piled up, and every object felt like it belonged to a version of me that had paused somewhere mid-sentence. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and still half expect her voice, the sound of her laughter that used to bounce through the phone whenever she said my name. But grief, I've learned, isn't a clean line. It doesn't end with a funeral or an anniversary or a new year. It lingers in the quiet, shows up in grocery store aisles, or in the way you hesitate before calling a number that no longer exists. Noah stayed through all of it, not out of obligation, but because that's who he was. Patient in a way that made me nervous at first. Kind in a way that didn't demand gratitude. I remember one evening, I was sitting on the bathroom floor, still wearing the dress from work, my makeup streaked, because I'd gotten blindsided by a photo of my mom that popped up on my phone. I was angry, not at her, not at anyone in particular, just at the weight of missing something that couldn't be undone. He didn't say anything when he found me. He just sat down, back against the wall, and stayed. It's strange, the people who heal you rarely do it with grand gestures. It's in the small, steady things, the sound of the kettle boiling, the warmth of another hand brushing yours when you're too lost in thought to notice. The way someone doesn't try to fill your silence, but lets it exist until you can breathe through it. I started going to therapy again after that, not because anything was wrong in the obvious way, but because I realized healing isn't a finish line you cross. It's maintenance. It's learning how to hold yourself with the same gentleness you reserve for others. My therapist asked me once, "Do you think you've forgiven yourself?" I told her I wasn't sure. That forgiveness felt too clean, too definitive. Maybe it wasn't about forgiving, but understanding. Because the truth is, I was cruel to myself for years. For staying too long in a marriage that hollowed me out. For cheating back when I thought that would give me control. For being addicted to chaos and then pretending it was love. But now, years later, I look back and see someone who was just trying to survive with the tools she had. A woman clawing her way out of loneliness, grasping for meaning in all the wrong places. I don't hate her anymore. I think, in some quiet way, I even love her. There are moments now, soft, ordinary ones, that catch me off guard. The morning light spilling over the counter while Noah makes coffee. The smell of rain on asphalt. A song that comes on the radio that once meant heartbreak, but now just sounds like memory. I used to think closure was a door that shut. Now I think it's a window that opens slowly, letting in air after a long time of forgetting to breathe. One night, Noah and I took a walk down by the river. The air was crisp, and the city lights shimmered across the water like tiny, unkept promises. He was talking about something work, I think, but I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about how, in another version of my life, I might have never met him. I might have stayed with Eric, had the house, the car, the curated smile. I would have called it happiness because I wouldn't have known better. But this life, this messy, tender, imperfect life, feels more real than anything I could have planned. And I think that's the quiet tragedy and beauty of it all. That sometimes, love has to break you open to make space for who you're meant to become. Noah stopped mid-sentence and smiled at me, that soft, half-curious way he does when he knows I've drifted into my thoughts. "What's going on in there?" he asked. I laughed, just thinking about how everything somehow ended up okay. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Not perfect," he said, "but okay." And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the kind of ending I'd been searching for, not a dramatic, cinematic one, but the quiet acceptance that peace doesn't look like what we imagined. It looks like sitting beside someone who knows your worst and still chooses you every day. It looks like knowing you could survive on your own, but choosing not to. Later that night, after he'd fallen asleep, I sat by the window and looked out at the city. It was late, almost 2 a.m., and everything felt still except for a few distant sounds. A car engine, a dog barking, someone laughing faintly down the street. I opened my journal, the one I hadn't touched in months, and wrote, I used to think love was about holding on. Now I think it's about knowing when to let go of pain, of pride, of the version of yourself that always expects to be abandoned. Maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting, but learning how to stay soft, even after everything. When I closed the notebook, I realized I wasn't sad anymore. Not in the sharp, endless way I used to be. The ache had softened into something else, something almost gentle. I think love does that, even the ones that end. They leave traces, echoes, and if you let them, those echoes become wisdom. Sometimes, when I walk through the city alone, I catch my reflection in the glass of a storefront or a passing bus and barely recognize myself. Not because I've changed in some dramatic way, but because I've become the person I used to write about, the one who knows her worth, who can stand alone without collapsing, who can love without losing herself. It's not a happy ending, not exactly. It's something quieter, truer, a continuation. And if I were writing this on Reddit, if I were posting my story for strangers to dissect, to analyze, to hold in the digital way we hold each other now, I think I'd end it with this. I don't know if we ever stop wanting closure, but maybe closure isn't something that happens to you. Maybe it's something you create slowly by learning to live again. And one day, without even realizing it, you'll look around and realize that the story isn't about who broke you or who healed you. It's about how you learn to love yourself in the space between. And that realization, quiet and steady, will be the peace you were chasing all along.